In this episode, we talk about our very first listener feedback. We also discuss what I've been playing, my considerations in planning games to bring in a trip, and my top 3 travel games. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of OnDeck, a podcast about tabletop gaming in the Philippines and an offshoot of our hobby Instagram account, the Boardgamer PH, where we take pictures of and talk about our board game sessions. If it's your first time listening to us, my name is Glory, and I host this podcast. I am sometimes joined by my friends who also love talking about board games. But for this episode, I will be all alone. I'm sorry about that. In this podcast, we talk about our personal stories on tabletop gaming. I usually take the lead in the discussion since I'm the board game collector, and more often than not, the board game moderator. So my perspective is always from the point of view of someone who tries to influence her friends into this hobby. And if I am able to replicate that and get that out to more people who listen to this podcast, then that would be great. So before we get into the meat of this episode, we just want to hear from one of our listeners, Tonichi San Victores. Tonichi has actually commented since episode 3 and said that he enjoyed the podcast, and we, actually, Celine did, convinced him to get Acquire. I saw that he has played Acquire recently and enjoyed it, and we're very, very glad to hear that, Tonichi. He is also thinking of starting his own podcast with his 10-year-old son, and we've gone back and forth on this. I just gave him some advice and I also recommended some local stores to check out for podcasting gear. So, Tonichi, when you do launch your podcast, please do share that to us so that we can spread the word too. Always very supportive of Filipino podcasts, especially on tabletop gaming. But the feedback that I wanted to highlight from Tonichi is actually on episode 5. I'll just read it to you guys. Hey G, just wanted to drop a note to say that episode 5, our favorite games, is I think my favorite so far. Haven't reached episode 6 yet. The banter among the group enhances the podcast delivery and makes the overall experience more organic. Also, including the intro, outro definitely made it more like a quote unquote genuine podcast. One minor quibble. I find the intermission track is a bit too long, especially in between answers to the same question. Anyway, use these comments as you wish. Have a great day. First of all, if you guys have not checked out episode 5, please do check that out. We have a roundtable discussion on our favorite board games so far. I had so much fun recording, editing, and listening back to that episode. Second of all, Tonichi, thank you very, very much for your kind words and for your suggestions. When I was listening back, I also found the bumpers too long for the same questions in that episode. Duly noted and appreciate your comments very much. So if you guys have any feedback, comment, questions, or story as a board game collector and or moderator that you would like to share, please do send that across to theboardgamerph@gmail.com or www.facebook.com/theboardgamerph. And we will talk about it in a future episode. And with that, let's now go to our first main segment, What Have I Been Playing? So I haven't been playing a lot of games. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I run a podcast about tabletop gaming, but I haven't been playing a lot of games. I've been a bit busy with work, and also I started a new project, which I'll talk about later on, and another new project that I'll talk about in a future episode. So, I only have a couple of games in this segment. First of all, we started our campaign of Betrayal Legacy. Betrayal Legacy is a semi cooperative legacy game by Avalon Hill for 3 to 5 players. In Betrayal Legacy, players represent families who have specific members of their family in a particular timeline. One timeline is one chapter of the 13th chapter plus one prologue story. These family members explore the mansion and just try to make themselves stronger for the hunt. When the hunt is triggered, one person turns into a traitor and play continues until either the traitor wins or the other players win. The victory condition will be dictated depending on the hunt triggered. So, first of all, I've never played Betrayal at House on the Hill. I purchased this game because I heard that it really captures the horror factor. And I watched Haunting of Hill House, and it was so perfect. Like, you represent five people in a family. And how many members were in that series? I think five also, right? Or maybe six, but I digress. Anyway, I've never played Betrayal at House on the Hill, but I know for a fact that a lot of people love that game. And so, when I saw that they came out with a campaign version, I instantly jumped on the bandwagon. And you guys know that I love Mansions of Madness. So, exploring a mansion type game is quite a familiar concept to me. And actually, it's something that I very much enjoy. The prologue was awesome. It's a 13 chapter story plus one prologue. The prologue seems to be more of like a tutorial kind. And it sets the stage of why are the family members going to this particular mansion when they've already lost members of their families. It sets that tone and it sets the stage for that story. So my friends got the mechanics fairly quickly because it was really dependent on the story. And we just had to understand the basic concepts or mechanics of the game since we all haven't played Betrayal at House on the Hill. So we just had to familiarize ourselves with the movement mechanic, the other actions that you can take on your turn, the test rolls, how you determine how many dice you roll, death, what it means, how it happens, and combat. Because everything else is laid down in the three books. So the story of the prologue was really, really good. And we instantly wanted to play again. Actually, we played the very next day. Plus, the campaign factor was awesome since we were discovering things together. For Pandemic Legacy, Blue and I discover new things as we go along. And it's really a good experience. Like the anticipation that after your first game you'll get to uncover something new for the game. And so now that I'm experiencing with this with four other people, it's really, really awesome. The first chapter, the first story, and the 13-part story went by fairly quickly because we triggered the haunt right away. It was also very exciting, although it was not that scary, unlike the first one. I cannot wait for the other chapters. I cannot wait to uncover more mechanics, and I cannot wait to make up the story as we go along. And also, I like that there's a free play after. That's the downside of Pandemic Legacy, I think, that you play maybe 17 games and you're done. I mean, it's all stickered out, it's done. But there's a free play after this. I'm not sure if there's a free play in Pandemic Legacy. I have to finish I have to finish season 1 first, but in Betrayal Legacy there is a free play after. We'll probably do a podcast specifically on Betrayal Legacy after we finish the 13 chapters and do one free play. Next, we played Tiny Towns, a hot game right now. Very hot. Tiny Towns is a city building slash pattern building game from AEG for 1 to 6 players. In this game, you're basically the mayor of your own tiny town that you will have to build from scratch. I don't get why. Mayors don't build the town, right? They just govern the town. Anyway, you build this by getting resources from the pile, from a shared pile, and placing them on your personal board. You place them with the intention of forming the patterns printed on the card of the building you want to build. Placement of the buildings is important because it triggers points and bonuses at the end of the game. What's interesting is the fact that you get resources by nominating the resource you want, and each player will have to get these resources as well. There are certain exceptions brought by different buildings, but the general rule is you have to follow that nominated resource. The next player will do the same thing, and you have to get the resource they nominated even if you don't need it. So this takes on space on your limited personal board that can actually affect the pattern you're trying to build. So I love this game. I really, really did. I personally am not very good at spatial games, where you have to build certain patterns and optimize your grid, but I love it. And I almost won. Maybe that's also why I loved it. It's very interesting because it's a chain reaction and every move affects you. Okay, so you nominate something, you put it on your board, you're trying to build a pattern. You get that building, and that building occupies a particular part of your personal board, and then you remove the resources that you obtained. But it's a chain reaction because everyone will get to nominate a resource. And if you don't need that resource, then it will take up space on your personal board. So every move really affects you. So it was fairly quick. Even with 5 players, no turn was wasted since you're involved in every step of the game. So I also love that the buildings can change and their abilities can change, and your monuments, which your own personal monuments, where you're the only person who can use the power of that particular monument. It can change because there are 4 different types of no, there are several different types of buildings, and each type of building has 4 cards that will vary from game to game. So there's really variability, and I think that the replayability of this game is quite high. So Tiny Towns is very good, and I can't wait to play it again. I know why it's hot right now. I really know why, because of my first play. Finally, I got the chance to finally try out Keyforge. Keyforge is a card game by Fantasy Flight Games for 2 players designed by Richard Garfield, who is the same designer of Magic the Gathering. He also designed other games, not just Magic the Gathering, but he's really famous for Magic the Gathering. He also designed King of Tokyo, by the way. So, from what I gather, Keyforge is actually set in the fantasy world of Crucible, and players play archons or godlike beings who are in constant struggle to unlock the planet's hidden vaults to gain ultimate knowledge and power. Well, according to Board Game Geek at least. But for the actual gameplay, and forgive me because I am a newbie Keyforge player, but the object of the game, from what I understood during my first play and from what I've read, is to be the first player to forge 3 keys. Keys are forged by paying amber, and amber is earned through a variety of different ways. So, a game of Keyforge is played over a series of rounds in which the player uses creatures, technology, artifacts, or items of their nominated house to attack or gain amber. Once you nominate a particular house for your turn, you can only play cards from that particular house. So, play proceeds with you trying different combos and stopping your opponent from forging their keys. The initial release was Keyforge Call of the Archons, the red box. So I know that it contains all the chits, the tokens, and OnDeck. I got the Keyforge Age of Ascension, which is the 2 player starter pack. It's the blue box. It has everything you need to play a game of Keyforge, including 2 decks. I also got an individual pack, an individual deck from Call of the Archons. So I really enjoyed my first play. It was not take that. I'm not a Magic the Gathering player. I don't play card games in their traditional sense. So I didn't know if I was going to enjoy Keyforge, but what I found was that it wasn't really take that. It felt more like a Euro game, if you understand what that means. You have to convert this and get this and just go, go, go get Ember so that you can forge your keys. Of course, thinking of fantastic combos was helpful as well. I also loved the nomination part. It was tricky at first, like, lagi ako sinisita ng kalaro ko na parang, oh, sabi mo Shadows Kid, this yan eh. So, it was a bit tricky at first, but I don't think I've ever played a game where I had to nominate like a house and that's the only one that I can play. But I love the fact that it limits your actions and it was really fun to get around that. So what's interesting with Keyforge is that you cannot build your own deck. Each deck you buy, even the Archon and the artwork for your Archon, is totally unique out of the millions of decks created. So the combination of the deck you have or the deck you buy is different and you won't have anyone else with the same deck. So you can't build your deck, but you have a unique deck from everyone. Before I end this, shout out to Leo from Gaming Library who taught this game to me and got me to buy the starter pack. I cannot wait to discover this wonderful Keyforge world more as I play along. So those are the games that I've been playing. Let's now go to our feature segment. So in episode 4, I talked about the beach trip I had with my friends. I'm once again going to be traveling to the same beach, but this time with family. So I figured this would be a great episode to talk about the things I take into consideration when traveling with my board games. First question though, why do I even bring board games when I travel? First of all, I am a board game enthusiast. If I have free time, I want to be playing a game. So I always make sure that I have a board game to play I've also had experiences when we were stuck in an airport because my flight was delayed, stuck in a hotel because of a storm. If you guys remember, just last year, there was a big storm that hit the Philippines and then Hong Kong. At the time, I was in Hong Kong and my flight got canceled, and I had to stay in Hong Kong for another day, but we couldn't go out because there was a storm in Hong Kong. But good thing that I had board games, and that was what we did during our free time. For me, of course, when you travel, your trip is your priority. Gaming is only secondary. So, don't feel bad if you bring a game and you don't get to play the game. It just means that you really, really enjoyed your travel, your trip, and you made the most out of it and you had no free time. And that's actually a good thing. But if it does happen, if you do have free time, if you're hanging around, sometimes when I travel, I really like just living like a local, going to a cafe or the beach and just hanging out. And if you have a board game, then that's a useful way to spend your free time, right? So, what are the main decision trees that I have when I travel with games? First, is it domestic travel or international travel? Actually, this is more of, is it a land trip or an air trip? Because domestic travel or land trips allow me to bring bigger games since I can have a separate bag just for games. However, air travel or international travel, I usually just bring one or two games since I check out local gaming stores and I usually buy games there. I also make sure that the games I bring are pocket friendly because you have a limited luggage space. So you don't want half of that to be taken up by board games. That just doesn't make sense. If you have a land trip, then you can bring your board game bag. That's something that I consider. Number two, I consider who I'll be going with. If I'm with my friends, are they my board game friends or my casual gamer friends? Because that determines the type of games that I bring. And how many will we be? I mean, do I have to bring party games or do I have to limit it to, let's say, up to four-player games? If I'm with my family, I bring games that I like playing with my sisters. One of my sisters can actually take a bit more complexity because she usually plays with me. But we make sure not to exclude my other sister and even my mom if she's up for it. So, just like how you're curating a board game lineup when you have a board game session or a board game day with your friends, you also have to curate your travel board games depending on the people that you're going to be with during your travel. The next is, are we going to be playing outdoors or in the hotel? Because this determines if I need to bring a game that can take a beating or if I can afford to bring a game that needs to be taken care of more, like a card game. So, for example, I've played games by the beach and I played Zateji because and Hive because it's something that can take a beating if it gets wet or it gets some sand in it, then that's fine. And it also won't get blown away by a little wind. But if I'm usually just playing in a hotel or let's say my Airbnb or even in board game cafes, no, not board game cafes, but in local cafes, then I can afford to bring a card game. But if I don't expect to be interacting with people, like when I'm traveling for work, or if I just want to play by myself and I don't really want to play with other people, I usually stick to my iPad, which has a bunch of board games loaded in it. My favorite ones are Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride iOS app is really, really good. It comes with the USA map, and you have to buy the expansion in the other maps as well. But it's definitely not as expensive as when you're buying the actual board game, the actual expansion to the board game. It's around, I think, 200 something for, or maybe less, or maybe 100. But it's significantly less when you buy a new map. You can do pass and play or you can do solo play. So it's a really nice app. And it always gets updated whenever they release a new map. I also like Pandemic, the Pandemic app. I think this is the one that I play with the most because I love controlling all the players. So yes, if you like playing Pandemic and you want to know how it's like to control all the players, then you should get the Pandemic iOS app. There's also Splendor. I enjoy playing this. You can actually have a local play or an online play. Carcassonne. Colt Express, fun fact is that I actually learned how to play Colt Express through the app. And I got the app first before I got the actual board game. And recently, I've been playing a lot of Onirim. I don't even need the board game anymore. I just play it in my app. I know that Gonchon Clever also has a really good app, and I'm going to download that when I get the chance. So I highly recommend that if you are on a trip and you still want to play a board game, I highly suggest checking out the Apple Store, check out the games available, and downloading it in your phone or in your iPad and just play so you don't feel like you're missing out on the hobby, even when you're out of the country. I also suggest that you try to visit a local gaming store when you're abroad because they have some really good selection. Sometimes they have really good selection. So I recently answered this question in one of the Facebook groups. I think it's Philippine Board Game Enthusiast or Tabletop Gateway. And the person asked, what are some games that he can get from Japan? And I was just in Japan recently. And it's also a question that I had. So I checked some Japanese publishers, and actually Z Garcia from the Dice Tower reviews a lot of games from Japanese publishers like Sashi and Sashi. They actually have a big hobby store in Japan. It's called Yellow Submarine. And Yellow Submarine has a great selection of tabletop games. They're very friendly. You can ask them, is this in English or will I be able to understand this? And yes, they do have English games. And if it's not an English game, then it can be a language the independent game. So what I got was Demon Worker. Well, Demon Worker is now available here in the Philippines. And I also got Let's Build a Bus Route. I think this is like Railroad Inc., but set in Kyoto. So that's really, really interesting, right? They also have some games. They have a smaller box for Avalon and Resistance because Japanese people like minimalist stuff, right? So their Avalon is interesting because it's in a smaller box. I also visited, I forgot the name of the local gaming store in Hong Kong, their biggest one in Wan Chai, and they had a great selection there, and a lot of them were in English. So I got Discoveries, the dice game of Lewis and Clark there. Well, I have yet to play that one, and Cockroach Poker. They had Cockroach Poker before it was released here in the Philippines, and I got that because it's language independent anyway. I also visited a random local gaming store when I was in Spain, and I got Dixit Odyssey when it was already unavailable here in the Philippines. So, and of course, whenever I'm in the US, of course, I go to Barnes and Noble and any of the friendly local gaming stores in the state that I'm visiting. Usually, when you're in the US, everything is there. It's just a matter of being able to bring it back to the Philippines because of your limited luggage space. So, yes, when you are abroad, I highly suggest visiting friendly local gaming stores if you have the time. So, you can just bring one game and you can just try the game that you bought when you have free time. So, with that said, what are my top three favorite travel games? First, of course, I always have a runner up. So, my runner up is Jenga. Jenga, yes, it's not. Is it really a board game? It's not a board game. It's a dexterity game, and it's a classic. I think I'm okay to say that Monopoly and what else, Game of Life is not in the same realm as the games that I usually talk about in this podcast, but I still hold a special place in my heart for Jenga. Dirty Jenga, to be more specific, what we did was we wrote on the blocks, and if you got that block, you have to do the dare. So it's very, very fun. I have a lot of experience bringing Jenga in a beach trip and just playing Jenga all afternoon while you're drinking. It's a very fun game to play in the beach with your friends. Number three is Love Letters. Love Letters is a classic. It's small, it's portable, and it's good for two, three, or four players. I chose Love Letters. Well, I also love Hanami Koji, Shoten Totten, and Lost Cities. These are probably my favorite two-player games. And they are in the same genre, they are in the same feel as Love Letters. It's a small card game, a compact card game, But I feel like Hanami Koji, Shoten Totten, and Lost Cities, they all take up a bigger table space. Unlike Love Letters, where you can just place it on a table, whether it's a coffee table, a small, small coffee table, or a stool even, and you can just play there, like Posoidos. Unlike in Hanami Koji, they have to be laid out. The same goes for Shoten Totten. Actually, the biggest one here is Shoten Totten. It takes up a big table space because you have to line it up. Although I've seen some Instagram board gamers where they really like playing Shoten Totten when they're traveling, but for me, it takes up too much table space. So yes, love letters, and it's versatile. I mean, you can play it with 2 players or 3 players or 4 players. Next is my number two. My number two is Zatagy because it can take a beating. I like this more than Hive as well. I've actually let go of my copy of Hive. And Zatagy, for me, it's an abstract strategy game that can take a beating. It's really just plastic pieces, plastic colored pieces, and that's And it's very, very easy to teach. I think they could have implemented it in a better packaging, in my opinion, because it takes a while to clean it up. But really, Zatagy, although it's not a dexterity game, it's still meaty. Although it takes up a bit table space, especially if you're playing with more than 2 players. But yeah, it can take a beating. You can play it on your beach mat and just you won't care about the wind. You won't be bothered by it. You won't care if it gets wet or if it gets some sand in it. So there, Zatagy is my number two. And my number one travel game is Clue. It was also nominated for Spiel des Jahres 2019. It's Werewords. Yes, it's Werewords because Werewords can handle more players. It's also social deduction, so it's really good with your barkada, your friends. It's a good game that you won't really need so much brain power for it. I also considered Avalon and Coup probably the top two most talked about games in this podcast. But Werewords can handle more people than Avalon and Coup. And it also plays great with a smaller player count. And the thing with Werewords is, ang difficulty ko lagi when I'm playing board games while you're drinking is that you don't have a proper table space. So your cards can get wet. It's usually my problem and I just opt not to play games. But with Werewords, what I did was all the tokens were in the cover. And since it's a hard cardboard for their secret identity, they just keep it in their pocket or they just leave it around. You don't need to take care of it. And there's no board. It's just an app. It's your cell phone. So the table footprint it can just be wherever. It can be a bit wet. I mean, don't spill your drink on my game, right? But still, it doesn't need to be babied. And again, like I mentioned, my copy of Werewords is Werewords Deluxe. So it can handle up to 20 players, but it still plays well with just 5 players. And everyone is familiar with Pinoy Henyo, right? I mean, even my mom can play this, I think. So it's so easy to teach and it's a really great travel game, especially when you are traveling with your buddies. So, how about you guys? What are the games you bring for traveling? Please do let us know and we will share that to our listeners in a future episode. And that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to hear more stuff from me, I have another podcast called Peaked with a D, which talks about random interesting things. So please do check that out if you want to. I mentioned earlier that Tunichi and I went back and forth on podcasting. And incidentally, the first episode on Peaked is all about hobby podcasting. So please do check that out if you're also thinking of starting your own podcast. If you like this podcast, please share it to someone you think will like it too. And if you would like to share any feedback or stories, or if you have any questions, you may reach me at theboardgamerph@gmail.com. You may also find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/theboardgamerph and on Instagram at theboardgamerph. That's it for today, guys. Thank you. Bye.